Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight for a very special webinar. I'm Varun Sriram from Generation UCAN, thrilled to be joined by running coach, exercise scientist, and an all-around good guy, Greg McMillan. Greg, how are you doing tonight?
Great, thanks.
Awesome. It's good to have you here, and joining us from sunny San Diego. I'm across the country here in Brooklyn, New York. You guys weren't really hit too hard by this winter bug, were you?
No, it's hard to complain during the winter months. I don't post many pictures of myself running because I'm afraid you guys will come and get me from being able to run in shorts and a t-shirt all winter long.
That's good. You've been still being able to train, so I'm sure that's very nice, and we're all jealous of that. So, Greg, we've got a lot to cover tonight, and really looking forward to chatting with you about a whole bunch of things. But the way we want to separate this tonight is we'll spend about the first 30 minutes here talking about training and some of the different techniques that you have training for various distances, and then the second half of the webinar will move to fueling and talk about fueling. And we want to keep this as interactive as we can. There's a questions tab in the GoToWebinar app where you guys can fire your questions away at us, and we'll do our very best, Greg and I, to get to each and every one of you. But Greg, let's starting out. One of the biggest components to running and having success with running is really being able to remain injury free, and technique. Your running technique is such a critical component of that. What are some tips you have for us to runners to focus on our technique to make sure we're doing things the right way?
The easiest cue that I know of is simply to think run tall. For most of us, we sit at a desk, we're sort of hunched over for most of our day, and then suddenly we go out to run, and we often carry that posture into our running. So I'm always cueing athletes, think run tall, because it's no different than when your mom always told you to sit up straight. Immediately your posture improved. And typically with running form, if you can just get in sort of the proper posture, this sort of run tall idea, then you begin to stack the body the way it's designed to be stacked, and it cleans up the majority of running issues that you can get from sort of, again, we're just typically in a bad posture most of the day, and we don't want that to carry over into our running. And of course it gets worse as you get tired, and so you really have to focus a little bit more on your technique, particularly in the latter parts of runs or workouts and races. So I like the easy cue of run tall, and then once you kind of do that, then you can begin to look at maybe some more detailed work you can do with a runner. But I find that typically if you think run tall, that'll cure the majority of maybe sloppy technique that we get into when we run.
What about what you should do with your arms, Greg? Whether I'm standing at a party, standing on the subway, or running, I never seem to know what to do with my arms. How important is utilizing your arms in the right way in terms of maintaining good run form?
Yeah, arms are really interesting in that obviously they work in concert with our legs, the opposite arm, opposite leg moving together to provide sort of that stability as we propel ourselves across the ground. And what's interesting is that whatever the arms will do, the legs often will do. That's why coaches are always saying, pump your arms, and really what they're trying to do is get athletes to pump their legs more. One of the things that goes along with that, of course, is that if you have poor arm swing, which typically is an athlete bringing their arms across their midline, sort of the side-to-side arm motion as opposed to that front and back that we would like, that can be a really common error that athletes have. Again, if we're in this sort of hunched over position, it encourages us to maybe run side to side with our arms. In those cases, I just tell athletes, for a little while during each run, throw your thumbs out, sort of like you're hitchhiking. Throw your thumbs out, your elbows will come in at your side, and typically you will encourage a little bit more of the front to back motion. It feels very strange at first. You look very strange doing it, but it will encourage you, at least it will show you that posture. If you're not comfortable doing it outside, you can stand in front of a mirror and maybe throw your thumbs out, see that real nice front to back arm motion. And another thing that goes along with that is that you should be very relaxed when you do that. If you watch the really good runners, their arm carriage is very relaxed. It's not rigid. Their shoulders are relaxed, arm swing mostly front to back, hands lightly grasped. Again, more relaxation and really just being a pendulum and really working in concert with the legs. That's what you like to see. And again, like everybody, we all get bad habits or we transfer bad posture and bad movement into our running. And so it's good to every now and then think about those easy sort of running form cues that can help you maintain good posture. And if you maintain good posture, you typically have better energy delivery, and that's what we want. We want to get the most bang from every stride, and a little better technique typically helps that.
So really, alluding to that efficiency of motion, really cleans up and helps out everything. And going to kind of tease our conversation later. We'll be talking about nutrition efficiency, and really we're hearing more and more about that in all aspects of training these days. Is really being smarter about the work you're doing to optimize everything.
That's right. I mean, most of us have limited amount of time that we can train. We have limited amount of ability to do all the things that we would like to do for our health and whatnot. So we really have to be efficient to make sure that we can do the best. We can get the most bang for the buck, if you will, and that's certainly, you can get that by training smart. And I think we've learned a lot over the last 40 or 50 years. And there's a lot of people that have gone from not running to running, and we've learned the best way to do that with people.
So, Greg, other than the running technique, what about pacing when you run? Pacing is a really important aspect of all of this, and how do you handle that? Sometimes people just want to go out there and go fast, but clearly not the right method. What do you suggest people do?
Well, I created the McMillan running calculator really to help people know exactly what pace they should run for different types of workouts or runs that they're going to do, so that then you could know you were getting the optimal effect from that type of run. Because running is a subtle sport, if you will, in that if you run at certain paces, certain efforts for certain durations, you get certain benefits, and they're almost sort of training zones, if you will, that allow you to get certain benefits you may want to build your fitness. And so I think it's really important that athletes understand and begin to tie their pace to their effort based on the type of run they're doing, so that they can build fitness from week to week, month to month, season to season. Sometimes it takes a little trial and error, but hopefully with some good pace guidelines and coaching, that athletes can really learn how to judge their effort across different runs and workouts, so they do get the most bang for the buck.
Now, you've created something called the talk test, right? And can you explain what that is? It's kind of a handy tool to help out with your pacing.
Yeah, I wish I could say I created it, but it's been around a while, and it really started way back when the first running boom started, and people were kind of running hard all the time, and coaches started to realize they needed to back off from this sort of push 110% in every run, because that typically leads to injury and burnout. And so that sort of led to, well, what is your regular running pace for just a regular run? Well, that should be conversational. That should be where you can just chat along with your training partner, extended conversations for the duration of that run. That's your endurance training. And most of us know that while when we first begin running, that's not possible to do because we kind of get out of breath quickly. But over time, you can run and carry on a conversation. So for that endurance type run, then you should be able to carry on a conversation. Then a lot of athletes want to do some work to build their stamina, and in that zone, it's a little bit faster, your breathing's a little quicker. Then you're down to more sentences as opposed to full conversation. It's more like, way to go, we're doing a good job, let's hold this pace. It's more shorter conversations, if you will. And then obviously you can do speed workouts, and then the conversation gets less, where now you're just words like great job or let's go or too fast or too slow, whatever that is. And that kind of is a good way to know you're in that kind of speed zone. You're breathing so heavy you can only get out a couple of words. And then if you go into the sprint zone, which runners don't get into too much, then it's usually dead silence or more moans and groans, if you will. But that's just an easy way for athletes to know, hey, this is an easy run, an endurance run. I should be able to talk. And if I'm getting out of breath, or at least I can't carry on a conversation, now I've moved into the stamina zone. That can be okay if stamina is the purpose of that run. But if it's not, if your purpose is to recover or just do an easy run, then you need to back off a little bit. So I like that talk test, again, because it's an easy thing that, you know, it doesn't require any equipment, and you can kind of get a gauge of where your effort is, the appropriate effort for that type of run.
Greg, just as an aside, as we talk about all this, how did you take an interest in offering or helping runners try to improve themselves and get better? Where did that come from?
Well, I think a lot of it just came from my own interest in myself getting better. You know, I was a good runner in high school and a state champion, and went to college and started studying exercise science because I wanted to learn how to make myself better. And of course, if you do that, then naturally people start asking you, well, what are you learning in class? Or what about this? What about that? And then suddenly you're giving them some workouts, and then suddenly they call you coach. So that was sort of my progression into helping other people. But I love it. I think, you know, everybody that works with others who are trying to achieve a goal, that's sort of what we put into it, is this just sort of partnership to try to help them get better. And you know, it started as sort of a selfish thing. I'm always trying to get better, and so I just try to use that knowledge to help others in their particular situation get a little bit better. And obviously, if you do it for a number of years, you get a lot of experience, so you can think, oh, well, I already did this with that athlete and it worked, or it didn't work, and so this would probably work with this same type athlete.
So that's a great perspective, and it's interesting, you know, how it really is a plan for each athlete, right? There's no cookie cutter approach to this. How individualized does training and the advice you offer from athlete to athlete have to be?
Well, I think that's step two for most people, right? First step is just start running. Just get out there. You can follow any program, but just become a runner. But then soon you'll figure out that you have some particular unique traits. And if you train in a group environment, you really start to see this, where you run with some athletes, and on some runs they're better than you are at it, or in these other workouts you're better than they are, even though your race times may be the same. And so soon you begin to learn that you're slightly different than your training partner in these very fundamental ways. And so the idea then is that you need to figure that out, so that then you can tailor the training, you can customize it so that it fits you better. So again, it's sort of that idea that we are all slightly different in our physiology and psychology. And so if you can tailor the training to really capitalize on your unique situation and maybe overcome some of the limitations you have, then what we see is your fitness really goes to its highest level, and you have then the chance to be your best, and also to avoid the pitfalls of trying to train on somebody else's program that isn't a good match for you, and then you kind of feel like you're, you know, hitting your head against the wall. So a lot of it is trying to figure out yourself. That's, I mean, my book's called You Only Faster, because it's all about you, and it's about trying to, you know, use these tools and sort of process to figure out, well, what's unique about me as a runner, and how might that inform my training as I'm getting ready for an event, or, you know, the winter or the summer, or whatever your situation is.
So, Greg, you have some interesting kind of little tips, one percenters, if you will, that the little things you can do the morning before a race, that can, or not even just the morning before the race, but leading up to the race, that can really help you out. Can you share some of your secrets with us?
Well, there's, gosh, I don't know if there's any secrets. There's a lot of reminders for sure. You have to take care of your body. I think that's one thing that you learn pretty quickly as a runner, is that because of our situation and sitting all the time, and a lot of times having bad posture, and we carry that into our running, can be harder on the body than it than it really should be. So you've got to take care of yourself. It's also good to have some professional care, massage, chiropractic, whatever you have in your area to help take care of yourself. So I think that's really important. You have to be an athlete. You have to think of yourself as an athlete. A lot of runners don't think that way. In fact, a lot of runners don't even think of themselves as runners. It's funny. I talk to people, oh, well, I'm not a real runner. I'm like, well, you finished a marathon. Of course you're a real runner. So you have to think of yourself as an athlete, and sometimes that carries over into your sleep and your nutrition and your hydration and choices that you make, positive choices to help you in your activity. And then, a lot of running and performance is you versus you. So in your mind, you've got to, learn how to deal with that little voice in your head, and you've got to learn how to relax in stressful situations. You've got to learn how to sort of challenge yourself when that voice gets pretty strong and would prefer you not to do what you're doing to it, but you know that you're ready for a breakthrough performance. So there's a lot of mental parts that go into it as well. And so I think of all of those things as outside the X's and O's of just, what is the training I should do? What's the run I should do? What's the workout I should do? I think of those things as rounding out your full performance capability. And runners, I mean, that's a great thing about becoming sort of physically active and interested in your own fitness, is that it's a domino effect that you start to care more about your nutrition. You think more about hydration. You think more about mobility. You think more about posture. You work on maybe some fitness stuff that needs to be improved, and your mind gets better. You get more comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's what a lot of racing and training is about, is just gradually pushing that barrier that is immediate in your face. You just push it a little bit at a time, and then suddenly you're able to go out and perform at levels that you didn't think you'd be able to perform at.
When you think about uncomfortable in running, I mean, I think your mind immediately goes to the marathon. There's certainly a lot of discomfort in that distance. What do you remember about your first marathon, and how you dealt? You talked about being able to deal with the uncomfortable. What did you do to deal with that?
Well, I don't think I dealt with it very well. I felt my first marathon was New York City, and like most people who run New York, you feel great through 16 miles, and then you get on First Avenue and you feel amazing,
You
of
got the
course, and
crowd and
then it gets
everything,
hard.
right?
And
Yep.
yeah, and then if you're a first time marathoner, sometimes you're not prepared for that feeling that you're going to have, for that discomfort. And the year that I ran it, right when I got to the Bronx, so at about 20 miles, it started pouring rain. So all the crowds left. There were just a few sort of diehards out there, and I was all alone. I was in a big gap, and I was feeling horrible. And so I had a pretty big pity party getting to the finish line, and I kind of vowed that, okay, I'm not going to do that again. I'm definitely going to figure out how to better prepare for the marathon, and I think I learned a lot because of that. And a lot of people have had that situation. The first marathon is just always so difficult to prepare for, to even have an understanding of what you're going to feel like. Because, a 10K or a half marathon even, you can sort of do those distances or approach those distances in training so you feel confident. But the marathon, you don't go out and run a marathon. So it's a little bit of unknown ahead of it. So I don't think I did very well in my first one, but I tell you, I got a lot better at it as I went along, and I learned a little bit better how to control my mind through the race, and then to really be prepared for the segments where I was going to have to sort of pull all my mental resources together to get to that finish line. Because it doesn't matter if you're having, an awesome day and you're running a PR, it's a hard event, and your mind is going to play a big role over the last part of it.
I think everybody, well, not maybe not that exact story, but that first marathon, I've heard a lot of similar stories to that. So I guess, it's just something that comes with it. But it's a good time, Greg, to segue into our second topic here, which is nutrition. Nutrition certainly a fundamental part of any type of running, but something that really people seem to emphasize for the marathon. And I think what's unique, or I don't know if necessarily it's unique, but you offer a good perspective because you have the background in exercise science. From a nutrition standpoint, you've studied a lot of this, and I'm always fascinated to know, when you were going to school and really academically studying this, what were sort of what were the views, and what did people believe that was needed in terms of carbohydrate intake and sugar intake for endurance exercise?
Yeah, when I was studying, this was when the first sort of big block of research was done on carbohydrate fueling in endurance sports. And so that really was sort of validating the sports drink industry. It was really dialing in, okay, you need to take in this percent carbohydrate this frequently, and it will improve your performance. However, they're defining performance, whether that was run to exhaustion or some sort of time over a certain distance. And so a lot of it was just that component, which was you just got to feed the body carbohydrate on this regular basis, and you'll perform well. The problem, of course, was that we're trying to figure out how to work with the body's digestive system. It would be one thing if you could just pump this straight into the bloodstream and bypass the digestive system, but you can't. And so as you're exercising, of course, your digestive system is evolving or changing through the race. And so that's when we really started to run into, well, I know this is ideal, but look at all these problems that people are having, or, this is working for this athlete, but not this athlete, or in these conditions, it seems to be great, but what about in this situation? And so that was sort of the beginning of a lot of the research on carbohydrate fueling. And in the beginning, it was mostly sports drinks. It was only later that you began to see more gels or some other component coming in, again, as they were trying to find this balance of, well, we need to get this in, but we're having a huge problem with the digestive system not tolerating it, or it tolerates it in the first 10 miles, but then the last 6 miles, people are throwing up. So how do we kind of figure out this mix? And that's where you started to see these different ways to bring in carbohydrate. And that's where it stayed for a long time. And I obviously, the marketing component of that was really large over time. And then now I think you're seeing a switch where people are starting to figure out there may be other methods that can help avoid that situation. For myself, I couldn't do just a sports drink in the marathon because I feel like I couldn't get enough. Certainly trying to grab those little cups and drink I just couldn't fuel enough. I couldn't fuel frequently enough, and I was really susceptible to sort of the spike and the crash. So that was problematic. And then I tried sort of a combination of sports drink and the gel, but the problem there was, again, the digestive system was a limitation. So I couldn't get enough in, because then I would get to sort of sloshy or sick feeling. And so I was, like a lot of runners, just trying to walk through this trial and error process of, like, what works for me? What works for me? And that's why, obviously, I'm a big fan of UCAN, because it solved those problems of trying to shove in this stuff that wouldn't work for me, or at least I couldn't do it in a way that my body could handle at marathon effort for that duration.
And there's some people on here that are familiar with UCAN, some that aren't. So we'll talk a little bit about that and how exactly it's different in just a moment. But you kind of identified the dilemma that so many runners face. And so what did you do? I'm curious, in that first marathon of yours, did you opt to just kind of skip it and see how far you could push yourself, or what did you end up doing?
No, I was trying to do the sports drink, and I did the best that I could with that, but that's where I didn't fuel enough, and I think that's really kind of why I bonked, like a lot of people do, was I didn't fuel enough during the race. And then I tried to go to the gels and that, but again, that just wouldn't work with my stomach. So it was that problem of being able to get in enough to maintain my blood glucose. To be honest, also when I was in exercise science is when we really started to tease out what causes the bonk
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
marathoning. At
Such
first,
such a
the
fundamental
research,
word that you hear all the
yeah,
time, right?
yeah, the bonk or the
Yeah.
wall or
Yep.
any of that sort of really severe sudden fatigue. And at first, it was always thought, well, that's the muscle glycogen stores. So the stored carbohydrate in your muscle cells, your leg muscles, when they're run, they get depleted and then you bonk. But then some people, they weren't depleted, but they bonked. So then we started to figure out, well, maybe it's related to some other things. Maybe it's related to, blood sugar levels, because some people could have fine muscle glycogen stores, but their blood glucose level was low, they experienced the bonk. And then some people were okay in both of those, but maybe there was some mental drive that was sort of causing their legs to slow down. So the brain was actually protecting the body. So you start to figure out that the body has this real protective mechanism, and it wants to be happy. And if you move it outside of its normal, what we call it homeostasis, then it starts to get concerned. And if you get too far outside of that, it gets too concerned and it can sort of shut you down, if you will. And so a lot of what you need to do with fueling, in my opinion, is you got to figure out how to keep your body happy, or at least fool it into thinking everything's okay, don't worry, we can do this. So it doesn't sort of give you that signal that we experience as the wall or the bonk.
And that's such a great point, Greg. And you alluded to it. Not only keep your body happy, but like you said, keep your brain happy, because your brain can really shut down your muscles if you let it. It's like everyone knows that running is such a mental game. It's half the time you're out there trying to psych yourself out. And that's an important point too, because I think when your blood sugar drops, you don't only feel that lag in your physical energy, but you also feel that brain fog, or that kind of hazy feeling out there, and that's really due to your blood sugar dropping. But the thing I wanted to ask you is, you've coached, Greg, athletes from Olympians to Boston Marathon qualifiers, a number of new runners, just regular people trying to fit in running in between their job and their lives. How common of a limiting factor is nutrition? Like, I've heard coaches refer to it as kind of the great variable for so many people. You train well, you're fit, but there's always on race day, there's always kind of that question, like, is my nutrition going to blow up on me? What do you see?
Oh yeah, it's a big topic. I mean, people are so concerned about what should I do because we know the consequences. We're afraid of the consequences, and so you're really trying to figure it out. And like a lot of things in running, it's very tough because we are so individual. And that's why, one flavor doesn't work for everybody. You got to have options. You got to figure out for you what works. And I think that's a big part of why people have questions, because we want it to be black and white. We want it to be like, do this exactly this way because that worked for me and you'll be fine, but it may not work for you. And that's why, one training partner has to do this type of routine and this one has to have a different routine, because they've got to figure out what works for themselves. And I just look at it as, we've got to keep the body happy. We have to keep the blood sugar at appropriate levels, because if it drops, and everybody knows this, if you don't eat for a while, your brain's not happy, you're grumpy, and you can't be that way in the last 10K of a marathon. You have to be, you have to have a happy brain. You've got to have it excited to sort of challenge yourself over the last part. And so I think a big part of it, it seems to me, is keeping the blood sugar stable so that your brain is like, okay, everything's good here, and you can then put the attention on really pushing yourself, as opposed to maybe, that voice in your head being so loud, or the brain really kind of putting the brakes on subconsciously, and you're not able to kind of push. And that's what ruins so many races for people. So for me, a lot of it is, hey, yeah, this is an important component. Now we got to figure out how, to dial this in for you.
When you were talking earlier about the bonk and or the wall, and previously people, attributing it to muscle glycogen being depleted, but actually, so many times it being caused by that drop in blood glucose. How kind of do you think most coaches and runners, have wrapped their mind around that idea, or do you still see people attributing that wall to depletion in muscle glycogen?
I think people are starting to understand that it's a more complex thing than just one component. But the problem that I see is that we realize that you've got to maintain good blood glucose levels. How to do that is you can either dose it really frequently,
Yep.
because once you dose it, it goes up, but then the body's smart. It goes, okay, we've got too much, a little more insulin, so it's trying to maintain a stable level. So you kind of ride this wave, and some people are okay with that wave, but most of us don't. We struggle with that, and so it's hard to keep enough going in the body because our gut is the limiting factor. So every runner knows where you've tried to take in more carbohydrate, more to try to keep your levels up, and your stomach just won't tolerate it. It can't handle sort of this continual flush of carbohydrate in that way, particularly when the gut's environment changes from the beginning of the race to the end of the race. That's why people throw up with the same drink that they were loving at mile 5. The thought of it, the thought of another sports drink, I just want to vomit. The spark, just putting another gel in my mouth just makes me want to vomit. It's because the stomach's in a totally different sort of environment than it was. So you've got to figure out a strategy where you can maintain that blood glucose, but try to limit your, what would you say, challenge to the digestive system. If you can move that away, then you begin to really reduce potential problems, because the potential problems are GI, and then obviously having to stop, go to the bathroom, or throw up, or some of these things which clearly take your mind away from getting from point A to point B as fast as you can.
Greg, is we're talking about riding that blood sugar roller coaster, and you talked briefly about this hormone insulin coming in and taking the sugar away. And if I want to just take that point for a moment here, with so many runners these days, marathoning, half marathoning, the popularity really exploding, in the sport of running. So many people nowadays who are entering the sport, and correct me if I'm wrong, you probably see this too, have a fitness, a weight loss, a body composition goal in mind. Out of the runners that you coach, how many of them, or what percentage, if you have any rough idea, would you say have some type of body composition goal in mind?
I think almost all runners do. I think that most people would like to be leaner, would like to be lighter, would like to, not in a bad way, but just most of us have that little extra that we would like not to have. And that may be part of our motivation for getting out the door, is to work on that. And I think that's I don't think it's the primary motivator for every runner, but I think most would be happy. And you'd actually be very surprised that a lot of the pros, the really skinny ones, they focus so much on, well, Meb's a perfect example. Meb, you talk to him all the time. When it gets into the time period when he's doing his biggest training, and obviously he's running Boston, so he's in it now, he is very strict with his diet because he puts a large emphasis on his body weight, his body composition going into the marathon. A buddy of mine works in an environment where he gets to talk to the world record holder in the marathon, for example, and they are very strict with their diet as the race comes. They're very concerned with, not carrying extra weight as they get ready for the race. And I think almost all of us are that way.
It's amazing. You look at somebody like Meb, and he's really, so careful with what he eats, even for a pound or 2 pounds of fluctuation. You think, if a guy's 122 or 124, does it really matter? But yeah, I mean, it's exactly what you alluded to. It's such a big part of it. And where I was going with that, Greg, is that the traditional carbohydrate dependent way of fueling, it really limits the gains for so many people that they can make in terms of body composition. I mean, we go to race expos all the time and, talk to hundreds and hundreds of runners. And I can't tell you how many folks we talk to say, I gained 4 or 5 pounds the last time I trained for a marathon. And it seems so counterintuitive, for so many people, especially first timers. I mean, it probably represents the most they're exercising over any given period of time. And really, what is the role of carbohydrate intake and insulin in all of that?
Well, I think the problem with, you talk about going through a marathon program and not losing any weight or even gaining weight is clear that something's out of balance. And a lot of times that comes down to not understanding how much carbohydrate you need as a regular runner. Too much, we take the pro runner and we say, eat like the pro runner. Well, the pro runner is depleting their glycogen stores on a regular basis where we're not doing that. And so then you have to say, well, maybe I don't need as much carbohydrate as those pro runners. So I like the idea of eat as much carbohydrate as you need around your sort of serious training days, but otherwise you don't need that much, and that way you can maybe control your weight a little bit better. I see a big problem with reward eating. People will go and they'll do a workout or a long run, and then they go to a buffet and they just pig out sort of as a reward for that run, and also being taught, well, we need to replenish, we've got to refuel. But if you overdo it, then that's just going to not help you toward your weight loss goals. So I think it's really a little bit of understanding that carbohydrate's role is specific for running. It is very necessary for running, but on a daily basis, you don't have to flood the system with, you don't have to carbo load every day to be a regular runner. We're not going out and doing a 5-mile run and being depleted of carbohydrates. So you can really focus on, fats, proteins, vegetables, those kind of things that we know help you be lean, help you stay strong and healthy, and then you can focus your carbohydrate around your maybe harder or longer efforts. And that's a great way to maybe dial in your carbohydrate intake. Because if you have too much carbohydrate, it will just get converted to fat. Once the body's happy and it's done everything it needs to do with it, then it says, great, I'll store that for later, because it didn't know when we evolved if it was going to get a meal anytime soon. We don't have that problem now. So we need to make sure we respect that process of the body and try to, I just think most people know the healthy stuff to eat. The stuff that you should eat, and it's just making a choice to do that more often than not, and then avoiding those times when you really sort of fall, is it off the wagon or on the wagon, whatever it is, where you reward eat or you overdo it too often. And it's okay to enjoy your food, but you don't want to ruin your weight loss goals by sort of pigging out just because you did a 5-mile run. That is not a good strategy.
So, Greg, we've kind of talked on some of the core principles, as it pertains to UCAN, which, really, well, I should say it's really some of the core principles of fueling, and the nice thing is they do really pertain to UCAN. So before I kind of take a few minute dive into the science behind UCAN, how did you first hear about it, and what attracted you to it?
Well, like I said, in my own running, I continued to battle the normal process to fuel for performance. And I continued to have problems with sort of the spike and crash. I continued to have problems with GI. But I knew, as an exercise scientist, I knew what I needed to be able to perform, but I couldn't get it in that other method. So when I heard of Generation UCAN, I thought, well, now that sounds like what we're after. It sounds like if you can take this and you have a more stable blood sugar, then the brain's going to be happy. And if you do that, and then, even if it allows you to burn a little bit more fat, so you're saving some of that carbohydrate, that'll help you later in the race too. And so from a physiologist standpoint, the proposed benefits made sense to me. As a runner and somebody who was kind of struggling with these problems, I thought, yes, that sounds like what I need. It sounds like something that could help me. And that's why I got some and began to, say, okay, let me take it. Let me see how I feel. Let me see, what effects it has. Okay, let me do longer runs, harder runs. You experiment a little bit at a time. Different flavors, different sort of concoctions, if you will, of, how much you need, when, and that sort of thing. And so it was very quick that I figured out that I wouldn't have the spike and the crash. So I liked that component immediately. Secondly, I figured out pretty quickly that I would avoid the GI distress. And that was very helpful, obviously. And then I figured out, okay, this is the timing of what I need to be able to perform well for, say, a race that was going to last 2 hours versus a race that was going to last 3 hours, or a race that maybe, because I did a lot of trail racing, so something that was going to be very intense, very high up, but for a short amount of time, or a longer amount of time, or started really hard but then was easier at the end, or started as an easy course and then got really difficult. So you begin to sort of figure that out. So that was really, why I got interested in UCAN. Was it made sense physiologically. It made sense to kind of solve my issue, which I think is a common issue for runners. And then I did what I think all runners should do. You got to experiment. You got to try, and you got to see, well, what do you think? And for me, it works, and that's why I support the product. And I say, well, if you're having these issues, then give it a try and see. And maybe you'll have the same experience that I had. Maybe you won't. I don't know. You have to try, and you have to see.
My colleague Seth always says, "Treat your body like a laboratory," and certainly that's what you did. And I think Greg, the one of the things that you said is really the thing to play around with and figure out is really the timing of it. It is, and I'll talk about it here in just a second. Really, that all about that slow release carbohydrate and keeping you nice and steady. So, based on the intensity and the distance, you figure out how often you need to redose and when you need to redose. But let me just take a few minutes here to review kind of what makes UCAN unique. I know there's a number of folks on here who've never used the product before. So the unique aspect of UCAN is our carbohydrate, and it's SUPERSTARCH. Now, we've just spent the last 15 to 20 minutes talking about kind of the way different carbohydrates behave. So what's really unique about SUPERSTARCH is it was actually developed originally for our founder's son, JONAH, who you can see on the screen. And JONAH had a very rare blood sugar disease. He had a disease called glycogen storage disease, which essentially caused life-threatening hypoglycemia or low blood sugar. So kids like JONAH, previously they had to be fed every 2 hours around the clock just to keep their energy up. Otherwise, their blood sugar would get real low, and it could really be a dangerous situation. So JONAH's family, they were really living a life by the clock, feeding their son 10 to 12 times a day, every 2 hours, 3 or 4 nighttime feedings, waking them up in the middle of the night. And they were really looking for a better way. Gene therapy for this condition, years and years, may or may not work. They were looking for something that could help their son immediately. So they started searching out nutrition therapy and researching all different types of carbohydrates. At the University of Scotland, team of researchers in 2000, they started looking at everything. They started looking at rices, barley, wheat, tapioca, different types of grains, and they were in search of something that would release slow and steadily over time and keep JONAH's blood sugar very steady throughout the night, something that he could take a large dose of and that would release very slowly. It's really, we talked about steady blood sugar in terms of maintaining your energy as a runner, and you can think of it as the same way for JONAH. He needed something to maintain his energy where he didn't have to keep waking up and dosing. So what is SUPERSTARCH? The starting ingredient, it's non-GMO corn. It goes through a 40-hour cooking process just with heat and water, completely natural, that actually significantly elongates the carbohydrate. It's a significantly more complex carbohydrate, breaks down much slower. So that's really what SUPERSTARCH is. And today, JONAH is able to take 75 grams of the carb, or about 3 packets of UCAN, if for anyone who's tried the product prior to sleeping at night, and it keeps them steady for 8 hours. It keeps them nice and steady throughout the night. And I say a packet of UCAN, this is what it looks like for anyone who isn't familiar with it. So that's really what the carbohydrate is. So we started wondering, as you can tell from the discussion Greg and I were just having, what role this would have for runners or for athletes or for anyone exercising in general, because we all want to feel that nice, steady blood sugar feeling, whether you're working out, even if it's during the day, you want that steadiness. So what we did was we tested our carb against maltodextrin, which you'll find in most of the popular gels and other powders and blocks and so forth. Most of the other sports nutrition uses this carbohydrate maltodextrin. So if you're looking at the graph, you can see with the blue line, maltodextrin will give you that big old spike. And for anyone that's had a gel before, that rush you feel, that's that big spike that you see. But if you look at the x-axis, if you look at the x-axis, about 30 minutes on the x-axis, blood sugar starts to drop pretty significantly. And that's that sugar crash. So if you've ever wondered why they tell you to take a gel every 30 to 45 minutes, it's really to coincide with that crash in your blood sugar. So the great thing about SUPERSTARCH and about UCAN is that this carbohydrate releases very slowly and steadily. There's no spike. And then the breakdown over time is very, very slow and steady. So if you look again at the x-axis, this is a 25-gram dose of both carbohydrates, which is what you find in a typical gel or what you find in a serving of UCAN. 25 grams of UCAN on the x-axis are actually lasting you about 90 minutes to 2 hours, keeping your blood sugar and energy very, very steady. So that's the beauty of it. And Greg, just from a practical standpoint, what can you say kind of about how long you find a serving of UCAN lasts you, how long you can go for, and how do you determine the timing of it if you feel like you need to redose with more during your exercise?
Yeah, I've found that for me, I can get about that 90 minutes to 2 hours with a packet of UCAN, if you will. And so for me, since I can't run a marathon in 90 minutes to 2 hours, that means I'm going to have a supplement. But I carry in each marathon that I do, I carry a bottle with me so that I can refuel as I like with what I want. And so I think a lot of people figure that out, and some people. The last time we did one of these, someone was talking about how they were able to ingest 2 servings before the race, and they felt like that could get them farther in the race. Some people feel like they need to sort of dose throughout with smaller doses. So again, you've got to figure out what works for you. But this is exactly, that graph shows what I was, sort of experiencing and why I couldn't dose enough to keep the blood sugar from dropping. But with UCAN, I felt like I could have it was less problematic, and it certainly was easier to maintain than trying to this continued dosing.
So you talked actually on that topic of dosing. We had a question here from Shane, and have you ever tried front loading with more than one packet of UCAN? Have you ever tried taking a lot more up front?
That's not what I've done. I've done one packet up front and then dosing throughout
Okay.
the event. Whenever I've been performing, that's been my strategy. I think part of it was just I was nervous about how much I could tolerate, and I knew kind of what worked from training, so I stuck with that. However, we did hear before from a young woman who had had big success by doing 2 packets before the event, and then she felt like she didn't need anything until the finish. So that's probably one of those things that you have to figure out for yourself. Do it in training, obviously, to figure out what works for you, and then you can relax during the race and know, boom, I'm going to be ready.
Exactly. That's a great point, Greg. We've heard many stories of folks, taking 2 packets. Even I've heard some people, a guy, Chris Pannone, who's a 220 marathoner. He used to tell me that he used to actually take 3 packets, before he would run a marathon, and he felt like at the intensity he was going at, he didn't need anything else during. But yeah, I think that's definitely something that we know is possible and will last you longer. It just depends if that some people like fueling during, right? You like the feeling of having something, whether it's mentally or physically. Other people just don't want to put that much in their system before. So Shane, hopefully that helps your question. I want to take a look at one more piece of science. Greg alluded to this hormone insulin, and insulin plays a significant role in the storage of fat. When you have your insulin's elevated, then your body goes into more fat storage than fat burning mode. And with most carbohydrates, or I should say, when you get that carbohydrates that produce a spike in blood sugar, you're going to get a subsequent spike in insulin. So insulin will rise when blood sugar rises. So if you look at the second graph with maltodextrin, again, because you get that sugar spike, you see that spike in the hormone insulin. And that means your body's really going into more carbohydrate burning mode rather than fat burning mode. It's going into fat storage mode. The really unique thing about UCAN is that the carbohydrate releases so slowly that it actually elicits, because it doesn't cause any spike in blood sugar, you actually don't get a rise in this fat storage hormone insulin. So we see people able to fuel their workouts and races on far fewer calories of UCAN because they're actually tapping into and utilizing more of their fat calories for fuel. It's really, really significant, both in terms of energy and, like we alluded to earlier, in terms of body composition. On the body composition end, Greg, have you had any of your runners that you've either noticed or that have commented to you that they've seen significant body composition changes as they've trained with UCAN?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, isn't it? That if you can burn more fat, spare more carbohydrate, then you don't need as much fuel, and if you don't need as much fuel, you have less calories, and then so that really shifts that sort of dynamic in the direction you want for getting leaner. And a lot of people are starting to find that. I think that certainly certain diets now are moving away from as much carbohydrate, and that's really beginning to educate people that you can perform really well if you can tap into the fat burning and sort of stave off this high level of carbohydrate usage all the time. And that's a pretty positive step when you're trying to go for weight loss as well.
So what when you've used, so I'm just jumping around to this question here, Greg, but that's an important point you did make on the weight loss, because we talked about it, that it's such a goal of so many runners. But when you have used UCAN for a marathon, what has been kind of, how do you identify the protocol in your mind? Do you sip it at very specific points, or are you taking it more on an as-need basis? That's a question from Jerry.
Yeah, I always take a serving. Usually I start drinking it 1 hour before marathon start, and then I'll finish drinking it 30 minutes before marathon start, and that gives me that kind of 30-minute window. Because I'm also anxious, like all of us are right before, so it gives you that time when you're trying to get lined up and that sort of thing. And then I typically will take a drink of it every 15 to 20 minutes, but just to swallow, I think out of habit as more as anything, not necessarily that I feel like I need it, but just sort of ongoing as a fluid replacement. And that's been the method that I've used. So I'll carry a bottle with another serving in it and drink that at sort of 15 to 20 minute intervals. I don't do it on an as needed basis. I'm not a fan on as needed, because typically once you feel like you need it, then you're behind schedule and it's going to be very difficult to kind of catch up. So I think it's much better to figure out what works for you in training, have a plan, have a strategy, and then execute that strategy during the race. And like we said, we've heard people that have been able to take multiple servings before and have nothing during, and then some people will have, say, halfway, they'll have another full serving. Some people like myself, where I'm doing a little bit more dosing throughout. Again, it kind of depends on what you like or what kind of suits you. And to be honest, I haven't tried every strategy. I just found that strategy and it worked, so I kind of stick with it. But I could probably experiment and maybe find something that was even less complex. I'm big into making the system very uncomplicated. The least complicated strategy is a great strategy, and that's why if you don't have to have multiple products, you don't have to worry about all of this stuff, and it can become really simple, then I think you can put your focus on the task at hand, which is getting to the finish line faster.
So a big question that people always have, Greg, with UCAN is how does it work? What can I combine it with? What happens if I have a gel, along with UCAN? Maybe can you just first speak to that just from a physiology standpoint? I mean, how does it compare what the two products are trying to do in terms of energy delivery?
Well, I think the risk you have if you start combining with a sports drink or an energy bar is then you're going to introduce that potential for a steep rise in carbohydrate, which could be followed by that rise in insulin and then a drop in glucose. So you might start that system of the spike in the fall, which is what we're really trying to avoid, is that. So I'm not a big fan of mixing the two. I suppose obviously if it works for you, do it. But I've sort of stuck with just using the UCAN as being a good system for myself. But you just want to be careful because at least in the beginning of the activity, what we're trying to do is have a very stable blood sugar and utilize more fat. That's saving those carbohydrate stores for later in the race. So in the beginning, I'm a big fan of maybe let's really be exclusive to UCAN. And maybe if you feel later in the race that you just need something, then maybe that would work, I guess would be I just get concerned because now you're almost like mixing two methods together, and is that going to be good or not? You'd want to experiment in training to figure out if that would work or not.
And as we talk about nutrition, Greg, I think maybe I fall into the trap that we hear so many runners where it's all about how do I feel on race day? How do I feel on race day? But I mean, how important is fueling in your training? And so, some of the things we're talking about, both in the context of nutrition and UCAN in terms of sparing carbohydrates, getting better adapted to utilizing fat for fuel. I mean, those are some of the core principles in terms of getting more fit. So how do you see, the importance of nutrition in training and how do you use UCAN in training?
Well, it's been great because I've been a proponent for a long time of not fueling on some long runs so that you can really force the body to burn fat. You almost purposely bonk, or at least you get pretty close to bonking or hitting the wall as a real big stimulus to the body to burn more fat. Now, the negative of that, of course, is that your blood sugar is going to get really low. And so you don't do that run in the dark. You don't do it away from where other people are. You always have, sort of some carbohydrate with you. But what is interesting about UCAN is because there's a stable blood sugar but an increase in fat utilization, there's a potential for people to be able to use it on those types of runs and still get a similar sort of fat burning or improved fat burning rate without maybe the negative of having a low blood glucose level. So that gives me an option with people that I didn't have before. And so that's a real positive. And then, of course, if you're doing runs that are mimicking the marathon or mimicking your race, or you're doing a race rehearsal, then obviously you're trying to dial in exactly what you're going to do before, during, after, so that race day you're kind of on automatic pilot.
Makes a lot of sense. And I think that the good things, oftentimes I know from a nutrition standpoint, runners focus on the long run. The good thing about UCAN is that you want steady blood sugar, and Greg, I'd like you to speak on this too. You want steady blood sugar regardless of the length of the workout, right? So really, you can look at UCAN as a tool to stabilize your blood sugar, and if you're going shorter, you can just use less. Have you used UCAN for the 5K, the 10K distance? What's your take, in terms of keeping your blood sugar stable regardless of the length of the workout?
Yeah, I think obviously if you're going to higher intensity, then you're burning more of your carbohydrate stores. You're burning, you're challenging that system itself. And so a lot of people, if they're doing a high intensity workout, they use Generation UCAN kind of for the same idea, that they can maintain the blood glucose level, even though there's a really high rate of carbohydrate usage in the muscle itself. You're sort of keeping the blood at a good level, so the brain is happy, and people are finding that they don't sort of fatigue as quickly in those high intensity workouts. Again, you got to experiment, you got to figure out what works for you, and that sort of thing, but there's potential there as well. So there's a lot of potential. That's, I guess, back to the point of why I thought UCAN was interesting, why I think people should give it a try. It makes sense from a science standpoint, and I think the only way people can know is if they try and kind of see. And if you're having a problem, then obviously you got to do some experimentation and get that figured out so that on race day you can perform better.
It's, what you just said about somebody else just said this to me today about during high intensity exercise keeping the brain happy by keeping your blood sugar stable. I had somebody who was doing a CrossFit workout say the same thing, that when I take UCAN, my brain is so much more locked in and so much more focused. So that's I think I want to just reemphasize that, because for the shorter distances, when you're going hard, there's still a great importance to having something that doesn't cause that up and down in your blood sugar level. Greg, we'll just take, if you don't mind, just about 4 or 5 more questions before we wrap this up. But a lot of folks wanted to know, in terms of the UCAN with protein and the UCAN without protein, as I move this slide over to the various products. Which ones do you use? And have you used both the protein UCAN and the UCAN without protein before a run?
So what I do is I use the UCAN without protein, so on the left-hand side of the slide. That's what I use for running, for during running. So that's what I would be drinking before the marathon, during the marathon. I use the UCAN Recover, the middle one, which has the protein, for after workouts. I'm a big fan of replenishing the workouts, what you need immediately after, and I find that you can, mix that up and have that as a shake right after. It's also great as a meal replacement. I know a lot of us get to that point where, something happens at work and you're supposed to do your run, and then you get in that weird period of where you need to fuel, but you can't eat because it's too close. So that's become kind of a lifesaver for me to be able to just take that, feel good. My wife's getting ready for a 50K right now. She does that a lot, where she's able to supplement that, so that, man, she can't get a meal in, but she can get that in, and that helps in those situations. And then I really like the new Hydrate, which is really electrolytes. And if you're trying to stay hydrated, you can't just drink water all the time. You do need to have some electrolytes in there, so that the body, again, the blood likes to maintain a nice balance. And so I use all 3 of those, to be honest, but for sort of marathon performance, I'm using the one on the left.
How do you approach, another question we've had quite a few people ask, how do you approach breakfast, before a long run or before a marathon? Are you eating breakfast and having UCAN as well? And if so, what's a typical marathon breakfast for you?
Yeah, I typically will eat, just because I feel like I'm pretty susceptible to the sort of low sugar thing. And so my breakfast is usually pretty sort of protein oriented, so it might be scrambled eggs or something like that. But this would be maybe 3 or 4 hours before race start. So significant time in between, which is easy for, like, the Boston Marathon coming up. It's pretty easy when the race starts later. It's harder when the race starts very, very early. Like Los Angeles just started 7 a.m. or just before it. So you have to get up earlier. But typically I would be having something that, again, I feel like would, salmon and eggs or anything like that tends to work well for me. Some fruit can work as well. You just have to be a little bit careful with the crashes. But if you're real susceptible, you can get by typically with less food early than you need. I know a lot of people are realizing they don't have to have this giant breakfast. And I'm not talking about a big breakfast. I'm talking about something more of that. I wake up, I don't want to get hungry on marathon morning, so I'm having something that I know digests really well and keeps me from being hungry. And then I get to within sort of an hour before the race, and I'm able to use the Generation UCAN. So I've had everything from even oatmeal, which it can be good for some people, but I really like more protein based stuff like salmon, eggs, that sort of thing works for me. Not a lot, not a ton, just a little bit, just to kind of tide you over. But that breakfast, marathon breakfast, it's really a crapshoot for a lot of people. I think you got to figure out what works for you. You also have to back it up as well. You got to figure out what the dinner should be so that you wake up not hungry. And then you got to figure out, what the lunch should be before the dinner, and then the break. So you got to almost start about 2.5, 3 days before the race start, and you really need to dial that in training, because a lot of times we don't sort of pay attention to how our body feels, our mood, our sort of mental focus is related to what we're eating. But that can make a big difference. And most of us know this, and we need to apply that, particularly in the last few days before the marathon. Because if you know exactly what will allow you to wake up the next morning and not be hungry, or wake up and feel good, feel mentally alert, then you need to eat that. You need to eat it before every workout so that you dial it in. When I coached the Olympic training team, we really focused on that. What do you need to be eating? What's your thing so that the day of the workout you have a high probability of feeling good? And we all know some of the stuff that we've eaten, and 2 hours later we really don't feel good. So you need to kind of move away from that. And you're trying to dial all that in. So I have a pretty known regimen, I guess, in the last 2 days before, as the types of food that I'm going to eat. I'm not superstitious. I don't have, if I can't have this type of fish from this type of environment, then, my race is going to go poorly. But you kind of have an idea of the things that work for you, whether it be some sort of fish, or maybe it's some other meat, or maybe it's, vegetables, whatever kind of you're dialed in with is what I use.
You're not superstitious. You just enjoy having a happy stomach. So that's a
Yeah.
good thing. Greg, I got two more for you. A lot of questions people have about, kind of the logistics of you carrying UCAN, both in terms of what you carry it in, or, what you run with, and also the consistency with which you're mixing it up at.
Yeah, I use a hydration pack that has two 10-ounce bottles. Sometimes they're 12-ounce bottles. It depends on which pack you get. And I've experimented. You have to, again, try different hydration systems and see what works. But typically that works really well for me. One of them, I will have Generation UCAN mixed up with the normal sort of amount, a packet in that much fluid. It's going to get mixed as you run, so it's going to be really great during the run. And then the other one, sometimes it depends on what race I'm doing. If it's going to last a long time, then I might have another bottle of UCAN, or that one might just be water, or water with electrolytes, depending on the event and the temperature and that sort of thing. But I just feel like the hydration packs are so good now, and there are so many different styles available, that with just a little bit of trial and error, and so many runners have them now, you can borrow your buddies and give it a try, that you should be able to figure out a way to carry. I never worry about that extra weight. They don't bounce. They're really dialed in. And then I'm able to drink as I like. So I hate the sort of traffic jams at the water stops. I never felt like I could get what I wanted during those. This way, when it comes to an aid station, I just run right down in the middle of the road and let everybody fight for the goodies over there, and I can drink exactly on my time how I want. So I just really encourage people, give that a shot. The pros get to get their own bottles, on tables every 5K. We should be able to get our own bottles too. They're just not going to put them out for us, so we've got to carry them. But I think it's great. It's the way to go. I've done it the last few marathons, and I feel like it's just one of those, another thing that's a stressor I don't have to stress about. I know I've got exactly what I want when I want it, and people should give that a try and find what works for them. You'll like it in the end. Even if you don't like the idea, you'll like it in the end, because you'll love that you can do what you want to do when you want to do it. Self-reliance is a big part of running. So
That's so fascinating to me. I know the one of the first times we spoke, when we were talking about mid-run fueling, and this topic came up, when you that you are a strong proponent of carrying your own I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. It just seems like I can imagine you get a lot of pushback from runners you coach on that, right?
Well, certainly the faster runners. I mean, I think that it's one thing, for people that are going to be out there for several hours. That's normal that you need to carry, and that's not as unknown for sure. But when you start talking about people that are running around 3 hours for the marathon or faster, then certainly, that's not common to see. But I'm like, well, I've run 2 hours and 31 minutes in the marathon, and I think it's great. I think it's the way to go. I mean, if you're not getting your own bottles put on the table, you're not part of the elite group, why wouldn't you? I mean, why would you risk not getting the fueling? You put all this work in, and again, it's not like you're carrying a giant pack on
Yeah,
your
you're not
back.
can't running with
They're
a baby.
really minimal. I mean, you have really good options these days. I agree. If I had to carry it in my hand because I don't like carrying it in my hand, then I probably wouldn't do it because I don't like that. But there's so many other options now available for people that I think it's a smart way to go. So if they push back, it's okay. I mean, you got to do what you feel comfortable with. I just feel comfortable having what I want when I want.
I'll just add one point to what a lot of people asking about mixing UCAN up into a gel type product. I will send out a link in the follow up with some tips on that. Greg was talking earlier for anyone who wasn't on about how his strategy for UCAN during a long run is or a marathon is to take a smaller amount every 30 minutes. So take gulps of it more at more frequent intervals. Others opt to take a full serving roughly every 90 minutes or so. And for a lot of people, they like to just concentrate it really thick and slurp it down like a gel. And that's completely fine. The amount of water you use has no bearing on how the product works. So if you want to mix it up thick, carry it in a small 4-ounce flask and just gulp it down all at once. I know a lot of people, we hear from people every day that they're doing that. And I will send out a blog post with that information after. But Greg, I really want to thank you for your time. Excited that I'm going to get to hang out with you this weekend. Greg will
Yeah.
be at the All-American Marathon for anybody who's running that race that's joining us. He'll be joining us in Fayetteville, North Carolina for the second annual All-American Marathon this weekend on Sunday. And for any of you that'll be out at that race, Greg will be at the Race Expo from 12 to 4 in Fayetteville, 12 to 4 p.m. on Saturday. So, Greg, looking forward to seeing you. You're going to leave sunny San Diego, but, North Carolina is going to be should be nice and warm for you this weekend. But thanks so much for doing this and for sharing your wisdom tonight.
Sure. Always happy to be here.
You can check out more with Greg at McMillanRunning.com. I'll also send that link in the post-run email. And for all of you that signed up through one of our retail partners, we'll be we'll be sending you some info on how to get your free sample of UCAN. For the rest of you, stay tuned to your email for a very special offer. For Greg McMillan, I'm Varun Sriram. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Keep the conversation going. You can find us on Facebook, you can tweet us, and you can email me with any of the questions that we didn't get to. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.